All right, so walk me through this. You guys are hungry, you're driven, but it's government. And it's like, you don't usually associate hungry and driven with government. You guys are out there working 14 hours days, crushing it. What are you doing exactly?
Yeah, so I probably can't brag about the actual amount of time we're working because we do time cards. But here's the deal. This is not your granddaddy's government. We're trying to. I think several years ago now, we recognized that like most organizations, if they're successful, are digital organizations. That's why I started listening to this podcast. But if you're doing things the old way, you're not just ineffective. Like you're hurting your user base. You're letting people down. And so the idea of there are ebbs and flows in cycles of kind of opportunities. And from the tech space and then overall with what's happening in the world, like we want to go smart and fast. And I believe the government can do that. And we've seen that recently. And as long as that's the case, I want to be here serving with people who are doing exactly that. It's more exciting than it was 25 years ago. I'll tell you that.
But when I turn on like C-SPAN and stuff, it just looks like a retirement home. But when I'm talking to you, I've got like a lot of energy. It sounds like you guys are moving and shaking. You say it's not the granddaddy's government, but when we look at our representatives, isn't it skewed towards our granddaddy's government?
So the executive branch in general, like regardless of administration, you'll find patriots in there. So there are people who have been beaten down by the system that exists, but there are mavericks and get-her-dones and just like people like your dad who are in a uniform and joined for the right reason, early career people who just want to serve and be a part of something bigger. That was our last batch of hires, and they're in there and they're looking at friends who are doing other things. And like when they go back for reunions or catch ups, like they're comparing notes, and we're getting more applications than we used to. So I think there is some of that on the kind of upper end. An interesting trend is, I mean, there's a lot of people, right? This is the largest, if not employer in the country, spender in the country. Across federal government, the idea of doing that efficiently and then seeing the difference you're making, I see more people who are activated on the kind of later end of their careers. We're seeing more kind of people who've crushed it, people who've had success in tech or other places saying, hey, how can I help? Are you trying to angle on the government? Are you trying to get over? No, I really just want to give back. Like I'm at that point in my life, like how do I help? And so to that point, I think we have like a lot of pockets of goodness.
I 100% agree. And I think this is a good point to emphasize that when I watch the media, I have a depressed view of our armed services, most things in general, but specifically that. And so I live in a military town, actually in an army town. So I live in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is the 101st, right? And
my grandfather's unit.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Keep going.
So I've got like, I would say 80% of the people we interact with in this town, like when we go to church or grocery store, whatever, all of our social friends, they're all, flying the Chinooks or something, right? And we came up, we got close with a couple people in like SF and the Special Forces. And so they come over, I've got about 7 acres, like out in the middle of nowhere. And we set up a shooting range and they came over and we were like running through some operator drills and they were giving me this awesome experience that I've never gotten to have. And I asked him, I said, hey, I'll leave his name out of it. But I was like, hey, I see this stuff in the news about like this woke nonsense and like drag queen shows and like this. He goes, dude, he goes, it couldn't be farther from that. He goes, those are just these like rare little nonsense things that happen. He goes, all the people, he goes, at least in SF stuff that I'm in, we're all just like straight assassins. Like we're exactly what you would expect. And, like me. And so that gave me so much hope as like a patriot, as like a person who loves America. That gave me so much hope. And so I don't know. That's why I figured I'd share that little story.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, in general, if I'm just speaking about myself, like I have not found news cycles to be particularly helpful. And so I'd rather read books at this point and then and grab info. I mean, like, quite frankly, like it feels like we've been all the way around and we're back like in-person meetings and intersections I get so much more from those than like these like constant flows of data. We know how data works. I love my APIs, but like if I can get in a room with a handful of people, even if they don't think the same way I do, and we can get contact and we can get collisions on some of that stuff, I'm either going to get smarter or knocked down, or probably both. And like that's meaty stuff. That's what we want.
And then do you interact, like one of the guys I follow on LinkedIn, his name's Nicholas Chilean or something like that. He was, I think he was the U.S. Air Force software guy. Do you interact with some other heads and other divisions, or are you just focused on Navy?
No, totally. I love that question. So the government is massive. Not all things are created equal. And like there are like just brilliant people all over, but you don't always know how to find them. And so LinkedIn has been helpful to that point. But in general, if you spend enough time, like there's a gravitational pull. And so if I spend too much time in thinking about one problem or in one place or with one set of people, I find myself anchoring. I don't even realize it. And so the answer to your question is today I had lunch with Health and Human Services, the FCC, the Army, the Air Force, and a bunch of other people. When the world is at its best when it feels smaller, and we can chunk some of these things off, and we can figure out, hey, we think these problems are very specific to us, and sometimes they are, and most of the times they aren't, right? And it's just like a framing thing. So if you can take this big group of people in this big world and these big, huge problems and chunk them, like then they're actually solvable.
And so how did you end up in this role as CTO of the Navy?
Yeah, so I have two jobs, like all of us, right? So I think the meandering path is I just kept trying things that sounded interesting. Like the long answer is electrical engineer, was in Air Force ROTC, wanted to serve right before commissioning. I got medical DQ, and I was like, oh no, I want to be around and in uniform. I get to choose my own clothes, but I got to sit around people who were in the Navy and like looked at a bunch of other industry jobs and just wasn't as motivated at that time by those. And then I did a command and control job, and then a intelligence community job, and then a healthcare job, and then a business systems job. And so through all of those, it wasn't intentional. I just electrical engineering and computer science and kind of riding that wave. And then private sector stuff. I started doing. I guess the funny story is I think I complained about my computer enough that they asked me to help fix computers across the Department of Navy, and so that was in a long title, but tech director for Program Executive Office Digital. So the short version of that is like technical director of IT services, along with the the executive, and then the CTO for Department of Navy fleeted up to CIO, and so I started doing both.
And so do you have like an official rank as that position, or do you hold it as a civilian? How does that work?
I hold it as a civilian. The civilian force and the military force work very integrated. The civil military fusion, super effective. Talk more about fusions, but my rank is I'm this is a little bit wonky, but there's the government scale. There's GS. And then there's the executive ranks, and then there's political appointees. So I'm above GS and below appointee. I'm what's called a senior scientific technical manager, but it's like of the executive echelon.
Yeah, to that point of that fusion stuff, I'd say half the people I interact with in this town, they're active duty, and the other half are like retired, but they're civilians working in the same buildings that they were working in when they weren't retired, when they were active duty. It's very complicated how all of that works, but it's closely intertwined.
Yeah. And to that point, like I've listened to the show a bunch. The most of the guests, I think, are private sector guests, and they're making big things happen. I wanted to mention that like the intertwining between private sector and public sector is growing also. So like that mesh is like on the uptick. and we're listening. I mean, back in the day, we used to invent all of our own stuff, and it was government off the shelf. The amount that dual use case and that our private sector relationships are turning into win-wins, like night and day from, I don't know, less than 10, 12 years ago.
Well, by the way, I very much appreciate that you're a listener. So thank you so much for listening to the content.
Yeah, man. The first episode I listened to was the National Instruments CTO, Thomas Benjamin. I was with him, and I'm like, this dude is brilliant. I just want to hear more. And so I got his card, and I thought we'd have a relationship. But yours was the first one I picked up, and I'm like, okay, this is for me. The idea of people coming on here and talking about getting after it is something I wanted to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the feedback. Hey, what is a typical day like for you as the Navy CTO?
That's awesome. So within Department of Navy, so Navy and Marine Corps, I'd say that there are no typical days. They're mostly productive and long, but fairly rangy. And so from the IT side of things, meeting with folks who are working on cloud, whether they're internal or external, working with folks who are in the weeds on cyber, and that includes the cloud folks, that includes kind of end user devices, that includes cybercom and some other agencies who are doing nitty gritty stuff. The short answer is a lot of meetings, but and then maybe work afterwards. But the longer answer is at the intersections of connecting the dots on the future of zero trust and progressing a handful of positively disruptive pilots day by day, and then looking at policy that's coming from different places and saying, hey, can we make use of that? Can we turn that into go energy within the department? And then meeting with users or super users to figure out, hey, are the problems that we're addressing the same problems that they have now, or have those moved us by? So I could give you the full list, but it's a lot of contact, collation, and then adapting our kind of daily plan, and then our quarterly campaign plan.
Does your culture have that sort of direct communication feel? Like in the private sector, you'll find a lot of feelings for lack of a better term, but people will sidestep, and then I noticed that when I interact with my military friends, they're very direct, and I prefer direct communication largely because that's what I got growing up, right? And I was I need clarity, I need it clear, and so we can execute. And do you find that in your job? Because you are in the fusion, but do you guys still have that direct communication?
Yeah. So from a Bayesian perspective, it's never 100%. I'll tell you, first and foremost, I fuel off of that, whether it's good news or bad news, whether it's getting or giving. If it's direct, it's efficient. And we know we can translate that into data and then translate that into action. So bias towards action, love it. Not every conversation is that. The cool thing is the more context you have. So framing is a superpower within the government because there's just a lot. There's no shortage of kind of context and opportunity. And so we have, there are direct people, you know who the direct people are. And then where there's a more nuanced message, you can normally calculate. I've gotten better at calculating that, and then also context switching. So the short answer is I'd say it's probably the best concentration of direct people. And then when you need to figure something out, maybe it's intentionally obfuscated, and maybe it's just they don't know the answer and we can dig in. I think my team is really good at that. So what I'll do, I'll just share a personal is if I come out of a meeting and I'm I don't know exactly what happened there, I'll bounce that off. We have a daily scrum, just 15 minutes of, hey, what do you think about this? What am I missing? Give me some blind spots. And these are people, and this is super interesting from a cross-functional perspective. We have some an Army guy, a Navy retired captain, a guy who worked for the FBI, a guy. So they can 360 me really well.
Dude, that is awesome. Does. So, one of the things that's been interesting for me since doing this show is the number of people I get to speak to that are Israeli startups. There's a lot of Israeli startups, and this goes all the way back to one of my trips out to like a security conference. And then they had like all the countries for the security conference. It was really cool. And I got to meet a couple of these people. Then I started to pick up on a pattern. And the pattern was that these people that were mandatory service time were like better people. They had a clearer style of communication. They got exposure to problems at scale from day one. So, I start at a Fortune 500 company. I'm a peon. I go into like the mailroom or whatever, and I work my way up for 20 years until I can work on the real problems. IDF, you start your service one, you're taking over some project of someone else and it's serving billions of requests a day, and you're just like the guy now. And so what I found was through my probably 50 plus interviews, different people that came out of the IDF and started a private company, is that their experience was so incredibly beneficial by getting to work on problems at scale in the IDF that like supercharged them. And now they're making a bigger impact in the world as a whole. Now, when I was a kid, I would tell you, if you talk to 18-year-old Joel, I'd say mandatory service is nonsense. I'm not doing it. It's not for me. But if you talk to, 36-year-old Joel with 3 kids, I'm like, we should make everybody do that in the United States. It would give them discipline, a sense of community, a tie to their country, and it would give them the opportunity to experience commercial problems at scale. Well, what are your I know you're the CTO of the Navy, but from let's take it personal. What are your personal thoughts on mandatory service?
The idea of serving, I think like going to your 18-year-old self, like the idea of serving isn't attractive to everyone until you're doing it. And so like when you're in there, I don't know, it's like, it comes down to how we learn, right? They say the majority of people are visual learners. Like, I think the majority of the people are contact learners, right? I can watch someone learn something and not learn much. I can do it, even if I don't want to do it. And I mean, like, who liked working out until you got good at it? Right. And so like now you're like, oh, I love working. You didn't start like working out. Like you started liking like sitting on the couch. And so like that activation energy, I mean, I think you can, there's almost like no greater honor to me than being in the military. And so like, I think there is something in the United States to volunteering and saying like, hey, I am calling into that service. And then like in a different way from a civilian perspective, like it still feels like service. And so if you're getting after that and just like signing up isn't enough, like you have to lean in. I don't know about all the mechanisms for like if people are made to do something and they're not leaning in, but like I love when people are choosing to do something, because then you're choosing to do it every day and like getting after it and getting after it. Do I think everyone would benefit? I mean, this is like a ridiculous comment, but like I think if everyone even like waited tables, like if you had like any sort of service experiment, my friends who left college and had never had a job got punched in the face in their first job, right? And so like if you're not getting after something that's humbling you on a regular basis, if that feedback cycle isn't coming at you, then we're just not learning as quickly as we should. And to this point, Marines and IDF and just like anyone who has that entrepreneurial spirit, they probably got it either from their parents or the cycles to say, oh, you know what? The connection between doing something and getting outcomes just got closer together. That's what winning feels like.
Well, I like you, Justin. You're my people, man. Like when I talk to you, I'm like, wow, how many people are like Justin in our military? I want more Justins out there.
There are some awesome people, and like my team. We were talking about how much we work. My team, they work so freaking hard that like when outside organizations or outside people are like, how you doing? Like the most common question, are you holding up? I'm not holding up. Like my people have me inspired. I am fired up, right? Like I've found that this is like a super anecdotal, but like whenever I talk to people who are burned out anywhere, it's not because they're working more than other people. Like I just think they don't feel that, I mean, it happens, right? Like there are people who work too much. But if you're not feeling like you're connected to a tribe and you can see the difference you're making, you're more likely to get burned out. There's a correlation to that that I've seen is much stronger than the number of hours. I know 60-hour a week people who are loving life, and I know 30-hour a week people who are burned out, right? It's not the amount of time. It's like, do you see the difference you're making? And are you part of something that you really care about and making it better?
Yeah. Have you ever come across Jordan Peterson's content?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to meet him a couple weeks ago in Nashville, and I went to listen to one of his lectures, and he talked a lot about a little bit to this about your aim, like being very, very clear on the thing that you're aiming at, and then allowing the world to orient. So like, this is not just a microphone. This is now an object to achieve the aim I have chosen. And like watching how your money and your time and your resources hone in on that one specific point. And after hearing that talk, I got to go with my wife. We got a babysitter for the night, did like an overnight in Nashville.
Date night. Yeah.
And date night. We get like one night a year where it's like an overnight, and then we do date nights like every month. But after hearing that, we both sat up in the hotel room like the whole night, and we're like, all right, what's the aim for our family? What's the aim for you, for her? And what's the aim for me? And let's put those on a piece of paper, and we got it designed up and put it on the fridge. And for the past like 2 months now, we've just every day we wake up and we're just like, that's our aim. That's our aim. And we are crushing it.
That's awesome. That's so intentional, right? Like you've like there's more data than there's ever been before, right? And it's like it's the same for like intentions. And so if we are aimed on one thing, like how else would we filter out everything that doesn't matter as much? So like by you prioritizing your life in the form of actions, yeah. And then like when something is out of line, you're more likely to notice it. So it increases observability. And that's a technical discussion, right? Like just like on our networks, if we're looking for something, we know how to find it. This is how we look at anomalous threats. This is how we look at anomalous behavior. This is how we look at like something that's holding us back from our ultimate objective. So I'm with that, man.
Well, that was actually the problem, is when the podcast got more successful, more business opportunities started to come up. And so people would be like, hey, I want you to be a part of this or a partner in that or be in this fund or start with this startup. And all of these things emerged. And Peterson and many other psychologists talk a lot about the fact that this depression and anxiety comes from too many potential paths opened up and not being able to decision and reduce that into one. And so the definition gave me the power to say no. So now something that's really good can come along and I could say, that's amazing. That would work. I would make a ton of money. There's great people on that project. Everything's go, go, go. However, it's not in line with my aim. So I have to say no to it. And then that gives me that freedom to say no to things now.
Oh, I love that. I mean, it's an alignment game, right? Like if you ever, so like life is like pretty good. Maybe great. But like if like something's up, you're like, okay, like what's in me that's not aligned? And to this point, like we can look and see that pretty easily. Same with like even our portfolios. Like whenever I'm teaching and I'm like, hey, this semester, like this group doesn't feel like they're as in line as they usually are. And there's like there's data there, like maybe their grades are different, but like this doesn't feel right. If you like, those are triggers to reflect and then like, hey, let's simplify, because simplicity scales, to your point, right? Like, oh, I want 7 goals. Do you know the word priorities didn't get pluralized until like the last 50 or 100 years? It used to just be priority. Priority is number 1. And you're like, oh, what are your priorities? Like, that's nonsense. What do you mean priorities? So there's one priority and then everything else is like not a priority. And so we've like pluralized this, right? And we understand why we have to. And there's a couple mechanisms for like wrestling with that. But the idea of like being able to say yes, that for like what is the biggest positive impact, as opposed to try and be like living in the cereal aisle. No one thrives living in the cereal aisle.
Just all sugar. Get out of there. You're teaching a class titled Software Defined Warfare, quite possibly the most badass title for any class in college ever. What is software-defined warfare?
That's a good question. So I'm excited about that one. So that one's coming up in the future at Georgetown. I had equally cool, maybe equally cool titled courses. So last one was Hacking for Defense. And then the one before that was Cybersecurity Strategy, Public and Private Perspectives. Less cool, but like still a great class. Software-defined warfare is wonk meter raised. This one is the idea of like, hey, something that private sector recognized a while ago, and actually Department of Defense started driving early on, but silicon and software is a bigger deal today than it was yesterday, and it will be tomorrow, right? And so like, what can we do at Ukraine type cycle speed for adapting? How long does it take to bend metal versus for a digital twin to change the way that we operate? When I drive a Tesla, and so like when we get those software updates, like I kind of get giddy at this point for, okay, like my look and feel is going to be different, and so might to some degree my steering. But like the idea of things as platforms that are inherently updatable just means that we can learn faster. And so software-defined warfare means like, let's look at the art of the possible. Let's look at where there are opportunities to use the leverage that we have and increase the leverage that we have across the board to adapt and then learn at scale.
How long is this class as far as like total length? Is it 6 weeks, 8 weeks?
It's 15 weeks. It's a full, like it's a 3 credit grad school course. Yep. Okay.
So teaching is like a large part of your life then.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I've been doing for about 10 years. I love it. The students are like, end up being like lifelong relationships. I'd say like mentor mentee, but it probably goes both ways. Some of them are off doing amazing things now, but yeah, it's at least 1 day a week, normally like a 3-hour block where we'll get together, and then the best classes will like do most of the leading. We do some flipped classroom stuff. We do some hands-on stuff, a lot of discussion. Very few of these classes are like technical. No one's like building code, but when we talk through strategy, like Hacking for Defense is a really cool one. It's taught at a bunch of universities. It's out of Stanford. It's Steve Blank and kind of lean startup applied to defense. This is one where they're out doing interviews. They're out getting contact. We were talking about service, again, very different, but they have to cold or warm contact 100 people, experts during the course of the semester. And so like 15 weeks seems like a long time until you have to have 100 phone calls and then collate that data and get after it. So I was just with the founders of the course. I was with Steve and some others recently. And then last night I had dinner with the Stanford Hacking for Defense class. I teach it at Georgetown, and they are fired up and ready to go. And then like they're in the trenches of this data. So it's a cool set of courses.
What type of experts are they contacting and why?
Yeah, they pick a problem, so it's domain specific, and then actually like they'll like drift a little bit. And so an example would be one of them. Well, the class last night was they're looking at documented policy, and they're trying to digitize all of it. And they're saying, okay, based on all of the policies that exist, like, is there an opportunity to optimize or forecast, or does this present opportunities? Can we figure out how to get things delivered faster? Can we figure out which policies are more useful than others? And so they created a software product or at least a model around that. We had one that was a team that was looking at space, so commercial space, so mostly proliferated low Earth orbit, we know those companies, but they were then talking to, here are NASA people, here are Blue Origin people, here are technocrats and policy people. So
Mhm.
it takes a lot to get to 100. So kind of anyone that they can think of, and then do parallels.
I love that, because that's kind of my job, right?
Yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought about that. That's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Contacting experts and pulling information and insight out of them. And I'll tell you what, my entire life changed after, my first, I'm coming up on, 10 years and 1,000 interviews. And
1,000
so,
interviews.
Yeah. And so after the first 100 or 200, this new thing happened where I just started understanding people better. And I was sharing this, years ago.
That's dope.
And somebody said that there's a book called like 100 Conversations, or the theme of the book, whatever it is called, is to go out and have 100 conversations with different people that are like meaningful, not like at the checkout, like, hey, how's your day? Or like go actually discuss the topic with 100 different people. And these new patterns will emerge. You get it because I've already done it, but these new patterns emerge and you start to understand different people, how conversations flow, different talking styles, different outcomes and objectives and incentive alignment. And you start to understand these parts of conversation in a whole new way. So that's amazing. Who's telling them to go contact these 100 people? You said Steve Blank.
Yeah. So so Eric Ries wrote a book, Lean Startup. I think he was a student of Steve's, and then and it's an awesome book. And then Steve and Pete Newell and a handful of others at Stanford were like, hey, like what if we get at some of these problems a different way? Like what if we just, like, to your point, aim some students at a problem who don't have any context? And we're like, what about context? Well, like, let's just have them go get context and let's give them a grade for that. And to your point, like the intersections end up being way interesting. I learned the space group is three guys. I had lunch with two of them over the weekend, and I learned so much about space from them. So like we did the final like presentation in congressional buildings, like just like called in a favor, and then we did it from there. And so we had like 20 experts come in, and they're like, those guys knew space. Like they've been doing space for 5 years. No one was working on space now. They sound like experts. Yeah. We're trying to build versatilists. I mean, like this is like how we want to teach in general, is like, hey, if you're in grad school, like hopefully you're trending towards a specialist. Like we encourage people to, I don't know, kind of get smarter from a generalist perspective. And then can you turn into a versatilist and like get those intersections? Because to your point, like if you can grab the hook, the things we're studying right now, school aside, anything aside, the problems are going to keep coming at us and we can't predict what they are. But if you learn how to learn through doing, and then you enjoy it, right?
You know where they do this really well? I picked up on it like 10 years ago. My brother went through med school and I was having lunch with him and I said, hey, he was telling me about some surgery that he had learned. And I said, all right, so I grew up with you. I shared a room with you when we were children. You've been saying since my first memory of you that you're going to be a doctor. You're on your way to becoming a doctor. You're a doctor now. I was like, and you have all this back knowledge, but at the end of the day, you're walking into that room and you're cutting into someone. I'm like, that's an incredibly detailed moment in someone's life. And that has to be done really well. So tell me, Mitch, I was like, how do they teach you that? And he goes, oh, it's really easy. Like watch one, do one, teach one. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, when we want to learn a new surgery, doesn't matter if it's what type of surgery it is. He goes, we go in, we watch someone do it. Then we do it on the, lifelike simulator or whatever. And then we teach someone to do it. And if we do those three, and that's it. He goes, we'll go take a class and we have all this baseline knowledge, but then we just go take a class to learn to do this surgery. And I was like, that's how you teach the most difficult things in life, right? The things where everything's on the line, where someone's life is on the line. And so if that's the modality to teach that, why don't we just apply that to like other ways of learning things? And so I started doing that in my life where I would just try to reduce the cycle time between seeing someone do it myself and then teaching someone to do it.
Yep. Like we get there's analysis paralysis, right? Like it depends on the stakes, but if we're just in the knowing knowledge and we never turn it into action, then like what are we, like experts of like I don't know,
theory?
Right, like from afar. And so the knowing doing, like oscillating between those two, like that's it's super cool. And then you mentioned cycle time, like the idea of, hey, VCs are making a bet and then they figure out whether that was a good bet or not in 7 years. Like chefs are making a sandwich and it either is delicious or it sucks in like 15 minutes, right? The closer we can pull in, especially from a technology perspective, that feedback cycle, like where we can, hey, let's try this out. Let's get that out to a wider set of people. I mean, like that beta into feedback, that is so important because to connect that back to the aim thing, there are 100 things to do. And if you're kind of like piecemealing your learning along the way, as opposed to like solidly learning something and then figuring out, okay, I can scale this piece and it's interdependent, that I can scale this piece, then you can actually get that traction.
Hey, have you met Ryan Graves? Have you met Ryan Graves?
That name sounds super familiar.
Yeah. He's fairly popular in the space now for he was on Joe Rogan's show and he was identifying when he was doing some of his flights these objects in the sky that he couldn't tell like how they were there. There were these like cube objects.
I watched an interview.
Yeah, and he was not approaching it from like the alien UFO standpoint. He was approaching it very pragmatically as hey, we're flying at the speed of sound and we don't want to run into these things, so let's figure out what they are, right? Which I loved that approach because it allowed him to cover it technically without being like labeled a crazy person. Anyways, the only reason why I bring him up is if you don't know him, you should. He's got good energy like you. He's a super bright guy, and he's making the transition right now from like fighter pilot, whatever, to helping a fund that's investing in detection technologies for detecting things in the airspace. So he ran into this problem in duty where he was flying into restricted spaces and there was objects there that shouldn't be there, period. Let's just leave it at that. And so he's like, we want to detect these things so we don't run into them because we're flying multi-million-dollar aircraft at the speed of sound. And so let's just start with that premise and let's build better technology to detect these things so we don't run in and crash into them. And so he's out there now for the past year or two, like doing that fund. So if you want to see some cool stuff going on, I'd talk with Ryan. And if you want an introduction, Josh can make it too.
Okay. Sweet. I do.
Yeah.
Like curious solvers, like light my life. And the idea of like people who, hey, I am in here in this case in the government, and then I jump out to solve a problem. Like they can even like expand that company and like turn that into dual use case. They can just solve like for exactly what they wanted. I mean, that journey ends up being like a wild ride. So I spend like, I don't know, at least 5% of my time with entrepreneurs who like never planned on being entrepreneurs, but like have launched something and then caught the bug and like are getting after it. That's awesome.
Because you're private and you're CTO, does your security clearance, does that still matter or do you just get only public information? Or like, how does that work?
Oh, you mean like because I'm not in uniform?
Correct.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I'm still a government employee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your clearance is still your clearance. It doesn't matter if you hold uniform or private. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I don't know that much about it. I'm just curious.
Yep.
It's like as a kid, I wanted to be like super secret spy guy, right? And so I got to see my dad in the Air Force, right? Who didn't? And so the fact that I get to talk to like really cool people, and we can edit this part out, but I became friends with some of the people that were building those screens inside of your op rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And so like just some of the stuff, obviously they didn't share anything classified with me because that would be inappropriate, but just the interesting stuff that goes on how you can start in private and end up with like clearances and end up being in rooms that like you never imagined you would ever be in. That to me is like fascinating.
It's the like not the looking glass, but like the idea of most things are deeper than we realize. Like if you're around the right people and you like you approach it with the right mindset, like what curiosity as opposed to judgment, like that's actually where real problems get solved. People who've been looking at the same problem or like the same room for 10 years, like maybe incremental progress. But like when NASCAR and Southwest or whatever airline met, like they figured out, oh, here's how we can do maintenance. And now we fly and get on time more often, right? Like these connection points and where they lead us. Super cool stuff. I talked to a venture capitalist the other day who is now leading a nonprofit for getting like elite grads to come do a couple years of service and then go back into industry, or like just people are doing like it's none of this stuff is static. Like people are doing interesting things, and like we're kind of figuring out what the ecosystem should look like, especially with AI.
So here's a fairly selfish question, because I was like, I have you here, I might as well just ask. So I've had the interest in a couple times it's come up. I was like, maybe there's some way I can be useful, right? Because I'm not going to go serve in the sense of like drop everything and change my career and join or whatever. But maybe there's like boards, or is there and I kind of see it happen in media from here and there, where like we got together all of these people and they formed this like board or whatever. But I get to see all of these technologies, and I get to see stuff that exists publicly, and I get to see the stuff that the private people have behind the scenes that are coming, because people show me stuff off cam on the podcast all the time. I get to see all this stuff, and I'm like, man, if there's people solving problems and there's some way for me to be useful, how do you think I would go about doing that?
Yeah. So let me make sure I fully understand. You've gained all of this experience, and you'd like to put it into service. That doesn't sound selfish at all to me, just for the record, right? You're like, you're like, hey, how can I give back in this way based on like something I've assembled that I didn't even like plan on assembling, right? Like this like secondary benefit that may end up being primary. So I think that's like super cool. Like most basic ways are like, so the dual use, I don't know if your whole audience knows what dual use is, but like what we consider dual use is that someone who's selling to like a product to the government and private sector, and like they have kind of like both sets of pipelines. Where that goes back and forth, it ends up being like if it hits the mark in both cases, like a pretty good economic deal. And so there are a lot of emerging startups in that dual use space where they need someone with business savvy, or someone with contextual information, like generalist information, where they can say, hey, I'm a specialist. You've met the either the CEO or CTO or technical person who can't tell a story. Well, like it's the same for like not being able to contextualize this. And so like first and foremost, where startups and new entrants and those vendors, where they have a great idea and they can't convert it into outcomes, like they need some steering. And we want that, right? Like I want this new energy, high impact company to crush it. But like sometimes they get stuck on something because they don't have the experience, but they have the right idea. And so we actually call it the valley of death, when someone has like a really good idea, but it can't land into providing some sort of mission outcome on the other side, and like have like a sustainable like growth rate. And so just like the lowest barrier to entry is advising some of these startups to make it through, or someone who is like only focused on private sector say, hey, what if you expanded to serving and solving a particular government problem at speed? Oh, they would never go for that. Like that's your granddaddy's government. Like not necessarily. If you can prove the impact that you have, then like there are some people in the government who will grab this new way and then ride that. And that might be usefully disruptive in some cases, or that might mean that we have to divest something to invest something. But like drivers wanted, and best ideas in terms of outcomes wanted. And so I think like a thriving market of high impact items is like the most straightforward. On the board side, I'm happy to introduce you to some people on Navy and Marine Corps and Department of Navy. We have an all-star science and technology board that just got stood up not that long ago for the secretary. It's a fairly small group, and they're doing kind of like intense studies right now. These are people who are like they've done awesome things, and I figured either because they have other jobs that like it would be like on advising, and they are in their elbow deep. They're like in the trenches, like actually helping us solve problems and investigate. One of them is the former Secretary of the Navy. One of them is the dean of a university. Actually, a few of them are deans of universities. And so like they're just cool people to kind of meet and get up with. The next time that we grab a meal or beers, if you're in DC, let me know. But like, yeah, there's all kinds of opportunities as the too long answer.
Justin, we did it, man. We made a podcast. How do you feel?
Yeah. I feel awesome.